Why were the SEALs whispering? Why, in the middle of a mission brief, did hardened men who had seen combat more times than they could count, lean into each other with the same question? Where's the shooter? The room was dim. A single lamp buzzed above the table, throwing shadows across the faces of men who had lived their lives in the dark corners of war. Maps spread across the surface. Arrows, timelines, grids, but all eyes kept darting toward the empty chair at the far end. It wasn't just an empty seat, it was an absence, an unknown. The commander's jaw flexed as he ignored the whispers, pushing forward with the plan. He was a man who didn't like uncertainty, and right now their mission had won. Out there in the target zone they would be exposed. Advancing across the floodplain meant being seen. Being seen meant being shot, and survival depended on one invisible hand, the sniper. But she wasn't here. And for reasons no one wanted to admit, they weren't sure she'd even show up. She stood outside, listening. The thick wooden door muffled most of the voices, but she caught enough. The way they spoke about her, the doubt, the disbelief. Her palms pressed against the cold steel of her rifle case. She had polished every inch of it before walking here, as if clean metal could silence the dirt people threw her way. A breath escaped her lips, slow, controlled, almost prayer-like. She stepped inside. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. A few men shifted in their chairs, pretending to study the map harder. She didn't look at them, not yet. The commander's eyes flickered briefly, then back to the table. "You're late." No explanation, no apology, just silence. She sat down, her presence heavier than any words could have been. The whispers started again, quieter this time, like leaves brushing against stone. They had heard stories about her. Some said she had broken during a mission years ago, disappearing for weeks without reporting in. Others swore she had put a bullet through her own teammate by accident. Rumors, all of them, but rumors were sticky things, and in a unit where trust was oxygen, hers felt thin. Still, the commander kept her on the roster, and no one knew why. When the briefing ended, the men moved in silence, gear clinking softly, weapons checked and rechecked. She followed, eyes low, hands steady. But inside, a different rhythm played, fast, uneven, like a drum beaten in the dark. On the ride out, crammed into the back of the transport, the air was thick. The smell of wet canvas and sweat filled the compartment. Rain hammered the roof like distant gunfire. One of the younger SEALs, barely 30, sat across from her. His eyes darted to her rifle case, then away. He muttered something to the man beside him. A joke, maybe. Nervous. She caught only a fragment. Hope she can shoot straighter than she walks. She pretended not to hear, but the words stuck. They always did. The man beside him, older, grayer, gave a small shake of his head. She noticed it. A quiet defense, wordless but present. Not all of them wanted her gone. That mattered, more than she'd admit. Hours later they moved. Rain fell hard, not the soft kind, but heavy, punishing drops that clung to the skin, soaked the fabric, made rifles feel heavier. The night smelled of wet soil and diesel. Their boots sank in mud as they approached the river. Wide, black, slow-moving. It wasn't just water. It was the line between them and the objective. Crossing it meant losing cover. The men crouched low, scanning the opposite bank. Nothing moved. But that was the problem, it was too still. One SEAL muttered under his breath, "This is where we get shredded." And again the whisper came, almost ritual at this point. "Where's the shooter?" She wasn't with them. Not visibly. Not yet. The commander raised his hand, signaling silence. His eyes cut toward the dark water. He was waiting for something, for someone. And then, without a sound, the river shifted. A ripple barely visible through the rain, then another. The water broke, and she rose. Camouflage paint smeared, dripping down her face. Ghillie suit clinging, soaked but deliberate. Her rifle wrapped, sealed, dry despite the flood. She emerged from the river like a ghost no one had believed in until now. The seals froze, even their breath stopped. No one had expected her to come from below. One whispered almost to himself, "Jesus." But she didn't hear him. Or maybe she did and chose not to react. Her focus was forward across the bank, scanning through the scope before the rest had even registered the terrain. The commander gave no smile, no nod, just a small tilt of his chin, a silent acknowledgement. She was here. Lying flat in the mud, she adjusted her cheek against the stock, her heartbeat sinking with the pulse of rain hitting the ground. Through the scope, a world no one else could see. The outlines of movement, shadows too stiff to be natural, the faint reflection of glass, a scope perhaps searching back. She slowed her breath, in out gentle, invisible. Behind her the team waited, trusting, doubting, needing. And inside her a storm churned. Because this wasn't just another mission, not for her. She had seen this river before, years ago, but not in uniform, not with a rifle. It was where her brother had died. The men didn't know, the commander hadn't told them. Maybe he didn't even know the details. All they had was her file, competent, unstable, valuable, replaceable. But for her this water was more than geography. It was memory, it was grief, it was unfinished. She remembered being younger, standing on this bank, waiting for her brother's return. He never came back. The river had swallowed him in silence, along with the promise of a family that never healed. And now here she was crawling back into that silence, carrying steel instead of flowers. The rain blurred her vision for a moment and she blinked hard, forcing the memory away. Focus, breathe, align. The crosshairs steadied. And when she squeezed the trigger, the shot was not just for the mission. It was for him. The echo cracked through the night, bouncing off the water, swallowed by the storm. One hostile down, then another. The path cleared. The seals moved, rifles up, crossing the river in disciplined bursts. They didn't look at her, but they felt her. The unseen hand guiding, cutting paths, removing eyes before they even blinked. And yet inside her chest, the storm only deepened, because she knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, across the mud in the dark, waited the one she had truly come for. Not a target, not an enemy, but a man tied to the secret she had carried for years. And tonight, that secret would no longer stay hidden. She exhaled, slow and quiet, as the last ripple on the river disappeared. The team was across now, shadows moving like restless ghosts toward their objective. She stayed behind for a breath longer, scanning, watching. The young seal, the one who had doubted her earlier, glanced back from the far bank. His eyes caught hers for half a second, rain dripping from his helmet. Something flickered there. Respect, maybe, or maybe just fear. Either way, it was the beginning of a shift. She pressed her cheek tighter to the rifle, letting the cold metal ground her. Ahead, the dark waited. Ahead, her past waited. The whispers were done for the night. Because the shooter had risen. And she wasn't going back under. Why was the forest so quiet? Why, after the crossing, did the night itself feel like it was holding its breath? The seals fanned out, rifles forward, their boots sinking softly into the saturated ground. The air smelled of wet pine and gunpowder residue, faint and unsettling. Every branch creak sounded louder than it should have. Every raindrop felt like it carried weight. She followed, low, silent, her rifle tucked tight. Through her scope the world fractured into frames of clarity. A tree, a ruin, a shadow, every blink sharpened into detail the others couldn't see. But her chest was tight, because this wasn't just terrain, it was memory. Her brother's voice whispered in her head, something he had said long ago, just before he left for his last patrol. The silence is never empty. It's waiting for you to believe it. And now, years later, she was back here, where his silence had never lifted. The team halted near a collapsed barn. The commander raised his fist. The men froze, waiting. He leaned slightly, his voice low. "Eyes up, something's wrong." They crouched in a broken semicircle. Mud slicked across their faces, their breath fogged in the cool night. She dropped flat, rifle angled, scope sweeping. And there it was, a shimmer of movement at the edge of vision. A figure too patient, too controlled to be random. She almost fired, almost, but something held her fingers still. It wasn't the enemy she expected. It was a child. Thin, barefoot, crouched near the ruins, watching. A boy no older than 10. His eyes wide, lips pressed shut against the rain. Her chest twisted. She had been that child once, standing at the edge of men with guns, not knowing if they would destroy or protect. She lowered the rifle a fraction, her breath uneven. The commander's eyes flicked to her. He followed her scope, spotted the boy. A pause, then a whisper through clenched teeth. "Hold fire, let him run." But the boy didn't run. He simply stared. Rain streaked down his face, mixing with mud, making him look like a small ghost. One of the younger SEALs shifted uneasily. "He'll give us away." The older one beside him murmured, "He already has." The words lingered in the night like a verdict. Minutes later they moved again, slipping past the ruins. The boy was gone. Whether he had vanished into the trees or carried their presence straight to enemy ears, no one knew. Her steps felt heavier. Every shadow carried weight now. Every silence felt louder. She told herself to stay focused, to push away the memory of being young and powerless, but it clawed back. Because she remembered the night soldiers had come through her own village, how her brother had pulled her into the woods, told her to stay silent, how she had watched men with rifles move past like shadows. Her brother had walked out to follow them. He never came back. And now, years later, here she was, moving in the same shadows. A soldier, a sniper, no longer powerless, but still unfinished. The rain thinned to a drizzle. Their boots squelched against moss. The forest thinned, opening to a slope that overlooked the target, a small compound. Dim light leaked from windows, smeared yellow against the gray night. Smoke curled lazily from a chimney despite the rain. The men crouched behind a ridge, studying it. The commander's voice was low, steady. 2 minutes, then we move. They adjusted gear, checked magazines, stretched cold fingers. She lay prone, scope pressed to her eye, heart slowing to the rhythm of crosshairs. Through the scope she saw them. Guard posts. 2 men smoking under an awning, rifles slung carelessly. Another on the roof, scanning the tree line lazily. But then her breath caught. In the far corner of the compound, near a rusted water tank, stood a figure that made her chest lock tight. Tall, broad-shouldered, scar across the jaw, half hidden in the rain. She knew that face. Her finger hovered near the trigger. Her pulse raced in her throat. It couldn't be him. But it was. The man who had walked away from her brother that night. The man she had spent years trying not to remember. The one she had come here for. Her vision tunneled. The world shrank to the scope's circle. The forest, the rain, even the SEALs around her faded. All that existed was her rifle, and him. Her lungs burned as she held her breath. The commander's voice broke through, snapping her back. "Shooter status." She didn't answer right away. Her throat was dry. Words caught there like stones. "Shooter," he repeated, sharper now. Finally she forced sound out. "Eyes on." But she didn't say what she really saw. She didn't say the truth. Not yet. Because if she told them, everything would change. The team prepared to descend the slope. One SEAL muttered a prayer under his breath. Another kissed a small photo folded inside his glove, a woman, 2 children. He thought no one saw, but she did. And the sight sank into her like a stone. These men weren't just soldiers. They carried entire worlds in their pockets. She carried something too, but hers wasn't folded in paper. It was carved in memory. The commander's hand lifted, a signal. They began to move. Gunfire cracked before their boots hit level ground. The boy had warned them. The compound was ready. Muzzle flashes lit the night, carving orange streaks across the rain. Bullets chewed bark, sprayed dirt. The seals dropped, returned fire, the forest exploding in noise. She pressed flat, sight steady, squeezing, releasing, again and again. Her shots cut arcs into the chaos, taking men down before they even knew they'd been seen. The seals surged forward under her cover. One tripped, slammed into mud. She adjusted instantly, cutting the shooter who had lined him up. He looked back at her as he scrambled up, just a glance, but his eyes were wide with something new. Respect, maybe even gratitude. Still, her chest ached, because through the storm of gunfire she kept catching glimpses of him. The scarred man, the ghost of her past. And with every second he stayed alive, her storm grew. When the shooting slowed, when the compound fell into ragged silence, the seals pushed inside, clearing rooms one by one. Shouts, boots pounding on stone floors, doors kicked open. She stayed on the ridge, rifle steady, eyes scanning for stragglers. Her heart hammered, her scope searched. Then she saw him again, slipping through the back gate, moving fast into the tree line. Her chest tightened, her finger curled. But she hesitated, because pulling the trigger now wouldn't just end him. It would end something she hadn't even faced yet, the question that haunted her every night. Why had he left her brother to die? And why had she survived? She lifted her eye from the scope, rain streaking her lashes. For a second she couldn't breathe. Her past had just walked out of the compound alive. And for the first time in years, she realized she might have to follow him, not as a sniper, but as a sister. Because answers mattered more than kills. She exhaled, shaking, steadying herself. The seals regrouped below, shouting for her to move down to cover the rear. But her eyes stayed locked on the trees where he had vanished. She whispered under her breath, words no one else could hear. "I'm not done with you." The rain swallowed her voice. And the night, silent, waiting, seemed to whisper back. Why did she hesitate? Why, with her finger curled around the trigger, did she let him slip into the trees? The compound was theirs now. Smoke drifted from shattered walls, lit faintly by the dull glow of burning embers. The rain had thinned to a mist, soft but relentless, coating everything in silver. The seals regrouped in the courtyard, breathing hard, their rifles still raised, their eyes scanning the dark. Mud and blood smeared their faces, their silence louder than the gunfire had been. She stood apart, rifle angled toward the forest, her body frozen in the aftermath of choice. The scarred man was gone, and she had let him go. The commander's voice snapped her back. "Shoot her down here." She blinked, pulled herself from the trees, moved quickly into the compound. Inside, the air reeked of cordite, damp concrete, and something metallic, the iron tang of blood. Broken furniture littered the floor. A radio crackled faintly in the corner, dying voices on an open channel. The men moved with discipline, clearing the last rooms, stacking bodies, checking corners. She felt their eyes flick toward her, brief and sharp. They had heard her shots, seen her precision, but they didn't know what she hadn't done. And that truth sat heavy in her chest. The younger seal, the one who had mocked her earlier, leaned against a wall, wiping sweat and rain from his brow. His hands shook as he reloaded. She caught it, though he tried to hide it. He saw her looking and gave a half smile. "Guess you can shoot straighter than you walk after all." It was meant as a joke, light, but his voice wavered. His eyes darted toward the bodies on the ground, then away too fast. She recognized the look, first blood. He had killed tonight, maybe for the first time, and no amount of training could wash that from the eyes. For a moment she wanted to tell him something, that the shaking fades, that the memories don't, that it never gets easier, it just gets quieter, but she said nothing. Some truths had to be learned alone. Instead, she gave a single nod, small enough. The commander gathered them in the largest room. His voice was low, calm, as if he were discussing weather instead of war. Primary objective secured. Secondary intel still missing. We move at first light. The men nodded, checked ammo, sat heavily against walls. Their bodies sagged, but their eyes stayed alive. She lowered herself to the floor near the doorway, rifle across her lap. The concrete was cold through her gear. The silence was thicker than before, the kind that hummed under the skin. Her mind, though, wasn't here. It was still in the trees, following him, the scar, the jawline, the ghost of her brother's last night. Why was he here? Why now? And why did she let him walk away? Hours bled into each other. The rain softened, the wind shifted. Some of the SEALs drifted into half-sleep, their helmets tilted back against the wall. One muttered in his dreams, words lost in the dark. Another rubbed at his wedding ring over and over, as if touching it could anchor him to something far away. She stayed awake, eyes open, listening. Every creak of the compound made her tense. Every gust of wind carried possibility. Her thoughts circled, around her brother, around the scarred man, around the silence she had carried for years. And under it all, guilt. Because when her brother left that night, she had begged him to stay. She had pulled at his sleeve, whispered that she was scared. And he had smiled, ruffled her hair, promised he'd be back by dawn. But he hadn't. And part of her had always believed it was her fault. That maybe if she hadn't begged, he would have been sharper, less distracted. That maybe he would have survived. Now the man tied to that night had reappeared, and she had chosen silence again. The commander stirred near dawn, rubbing his eyes. He glanced at her, still awake, rifle steady across her knees. For the first time, something flickered in his face, not doubt, but something like recognition. "You don't sleep?" he asked quietly. She shook her head once. He studied her a moment longer, then turned away, pulling maps from his pack. No more questions, but the look stayed with her. Because in that glance, she felt it. He knew there was more to her than her file. He just didn't know what. The sun didn't rise so much as bleed slowly into the sky, pale and gray through low clouds. The forest glistened wet, every leaf dripping. Steam rose faintly from the compound's stone walls. They moved out. The path was narrow, slick with moss, leading deeper into the trees. Birds had not yet returned to song. The silence stretched, heavy and watchful. Her boots pressed soft against the earth, her eyes scanning constantly. But her mind was elsewhere, walking just ahead, where she imagined him moving. The scarred man, always just out of reach. They reached a clearing by midday. The commander signaled a halt. The men crouched, drank water, chewed silently on rations. She knelt apart, cleaning her rifle with precise, almost ritual care. Every movement controlled, every part polished. But her hands shook once briefly when she touched the trigger. She clenched her fist until it passed. The younger SEAL approached, sitting near her. He didn't speak at first, just pulled off his gloves, flexed his fingers. His nails were bitten raw. Finally he muttered, "You ever get used to it?" She looked at him, eyes unreadable. "Killing," he added quickly, voice tight. Her chest ached. She wanted to lie to give him comfort, but she couldn't. "No," she said softly. His face fell, but then strangely he nodded, almost grateful, because truth, even when heavy, was still something you could hold. He glanced at her rifle, then back to her. "How many?" Her throat tightened. She could have given him a number. She could have shrugged, made it impersonal, but instead she said nothing. She only looked back at the trees, at the silence waiting there. The boy sighed, rubbing his eyes. "Doesn't matter, does it?" She shook her head once, small, final. The commander's voice cut across the clearing. "Move out now." The men rose instantly, gear clinking. The younger SEAL stood too, giving her one last glance before pulling his helmet back on. Something had shifted between them, a thread of fragile understanding. They pressed deeper into the forest. The ground sloped upward, rocks slick with moss. The air smelled of damp stone and pine needles crushed under boots. Every step felt heavier to her. Every tree trunk looked like it could hide him. And then it did. The scarred man appeared at the ridge above them, rifle in hand, eyes locked directly on her. For a moment the world froze. The seals dropped to the ground, weapons raised. The commander shouted. The younger seal cursed. But she didn't move. Her rifle was in her hands, but her body was locked. Because in his eyes she saw recognition, not of her uniform, not of her rifle, but of her. He knew who she was. And before anyone else could react, he turned and vanished into the trees again. Shouts erupted, orders snapped, the team scrambled forward. But she stayed frozen, her chest burning, her hands trembling around cold steel. Because now there was no question. The past had seen her, and it was waiting. They surged uphill. Mud tore beneath their boots, branches lashed at faces, lungs burned with each breath. The forest swallowed sound, muffling shouts into something distant, unreal. But her focus wasn't on the climb. It was on the shadow she had seen. The scar. The eyes. The silent recognition. He knew her, and worse, she knew that look. The commander barked orders, splitting them into two flanking elements. The seals moved with practiced precision, rifles cutting the trees into quadrants, every angle covered. She followed on the left flank, weaving through roots and slick stone. Her breaths were steady, her body automatic, but inside she trembled. Not from fear of dying. She had made peace with that long ago. No, this tremble came from the collision of two worlds, the war in front of her, and the war still bleeding from her past. A sudden crack of gunfire split the air. Bark exploded from a tree trunk inches from her face. The team dropped instantly, returning fire toward the ridge. She hit the ground, mud soaking through her gear, rifle braced. Her scope caught a flash movement, deliberate, controlled, not panicked, not desperate. He wasn't running blind, he was leading them. The firefight stretched, short burst, silence, another burst, silence again. It wasn't chaos, it was rhythm. He was testing them, drawing them out. And she, lying in the mud with her finger on the trigger, realized something chilling. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. He wanted her to follow. The commander's voice thundered through comms. Push forward, don't let him break contact. The seals advanced, bounding from cover to cover. Their movements were sharp, trained, but the forest belonged to him. Every time they pressed, he vanished. Every time they slowed, he returned, a ghost in daylight. She followed, her rifle steady, her breaths controlled, but her mind was fracturing, because each glimpse of him sharpened the memory of that night years ago. The doorway. Her brother's voice. The shadow leaving with him. She had buried it, but now it walked ahead of her, alive, armed, waiting. Hours blurred. The pursuit dragged deeper into the forest, pulling them miles from the compound. The sun fought through clouds in fractured beams, casting sharp contrasts, patches of gold light on dark, wet ground. In those moments, every tree looked like it could hold a figure, every shadow like it could breathe. The seals were silent now. No more jokes, no muttered words. Their discipline was absolute, but she could feel it, their frustration building. The hunter had turned the terrain into a maze. And yet she was the only one who sensed the truth. He wasn't trying to escape. He was leading them somewhere. They halted at dusk. The commander ordered a short pause, voices hushed, weapons always raised. Rations were passed quickly, water drained in silence. She sat apart again, back against a fallen log, eyes on the tree line. The younger seal slid down beside her. His face was pale beneath the grime, sweat plastering his hair. His hands never left his rifle, even as he forced down a mouthful of ration bar. "You've seen him before," he whispered. Her chest tightened, She turned, meeting his gaze. "What makes you say that?" He shrugged, swallowing hard. "The way you freeze when he shows up, the way you look at him, like you're not seeing him here, like you're seeing him somewhere else." His words cut too close. She wanted to deny it, to shut him down, but the truth pressed against her throat, threatening to spill. Instead, she said nothing. The boy gave a humorless laugh. "Figures, everything about this feels personal, and I hate personal. Personal gets people killed." He pushed to his feet, muttering, "Forget it." But she didn't forget, because in his voice she heard something she hadn't expected, not accusation but fear. And in that fear, she saw herself years ago. Night fell heavy. The forest changed. Sounds sharpened, every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind in the canopy. The darkness pressed close, damp and suffocating. The commander ordered a rotating watch, pairs at a time. No fire, no light. She volunteered for the first shift. The younger SEAL joined her, rifle braced across his knees. His eyes scanned the trees, but his shoulders sagged with exhaustion. They sat in silence, the kind that stretches, gnaws, makes every second echo louder than the last. And then she heard it, faint, deliberate, a single step. Her hand rose instantly, signaling stillness. The boy froze, following her gaze. The tree line rippled, a shadow moved. Her heart pounded. She lifted her rifle, scope catching only fragments, a glint, a line of scar. He was there, watching. The boy's breath hitched. He whispered, "Take the shot." But she didn't. Her finger hovered, her chest burning. And in that moment, the shadow turned, not toward the boy, not toward the team, but directly toward her. A tilt of the head, a recognition. As if to say, "You remember." Then he was gone, silent as before. The boy cursed under his breath, anger flaring in his eyes. "Why didn't you fire? You had him." She lowered her rifle slowly, forcing her hand steady. "Because he wanted me to." The boy stared, confusion raw. "What the hell does that mean?" She didn't answer. She couldn't, because the truth was heavier than words, heavier than she could share. Morning brought no relief, only more pursuit. The SEALs moved like shadows through the trees, their gear soaked, their eyes hard, but fatigue was cutting into them. Every mile stretched thinner, every movement a little slower. And still he stayed ahead. She felt it, the invisible thread between them, pulling tighter with every step. This wasn't just a chase. It was a summons. By late afternoon they reached a river, wide, fast, swollen from days of rain. The commander called a halt. The SEALs spread out, securing the banks. Eyes scanned the opposite shore. She knelt at the water's edge, staring into the current. The roar filled her ears, drowning everything else. And then, across the water, a figure stepped from the trees. Him. He stood tall, rifle slung, eyes locked on hers. The scar was stark in the gray light, his face unreadable. The SEALs shouted, rifles raised instantly. The commander barked orders. But he didn't move, he didn't fire. He only looked at her. And in that gaze she saw everything. The night her brother vanished, the silence of years, the unanswered questions. This was no coincidence. He had brought her here. The commander's voice cut sharp. "Shooter, take him." Her rifle lifted. The scope framed his face perfectly. Distance, wind, trajectory, all calculated in an instant. She could kill him, end it now. But her finger refused to move. Because behind the rifle, behind the uniform, he wasn't an enemy. He was a door. To the truth. To her brother. The scarred man raised his hand slowly, not in surrender, not in defiance, but in invitation. A gesture that said, "Follow me if you want answers." And then he stepped back into the trees. Gone. The forest roared in silence. The commander cursed, fury cutting his voice. The team scrambled, shouting for angles, firing into the brush. But she stayed frozen, rifle still raised, her body locked between duty and something deeper. Because she knew. The mission wasn't what she thought. And neither was she. Why didn't she fire? The question hung heavier than the mist rolling off the river. No one spoke it outright, not at first, but she felt it in the way their eyes cut toward her, brief and sharp, in the pauses after orders, in the silence between bursts of static on comms. The commander finally said it, not gently, not quietly. "You had him, why didn't you take the shot?" Her throat closed, words stuck. She wanted to say the wind shifted, the angle was poor, the distance uncertain, excuses, lies, but her silence said everything. The younger SEAL broke in before she could answer. His voice was edged, brittle. She saw him clear as day, and she froze. That word froze. It lodged in her chest like shrapnel. The commander's jaw tightened. He didn't press further. Not now. There wasn't time. The scarred man had vanished into the far tree line, and the river foamed between them like a living barrier. But the seed was planted, doubt. She saw it in their faces, even in the quietest glances. She was no longer just the outsider sniper pulled into their mission. She was a liability. And that was worse than being invisible. The team set about rigging a crossing, ropes anchored, gear cinched. No one spoke more than they had to. Boots stomped, hands worked, shoulders hunched with exhaustion and tension. She sat at the edge, eyes on the water. It was cold and fast, carrying branches, foam, debris, a place that could swallow a body in seconds. Her reflection warped in the current. Eyes hollow, face drawn. A soldier who had hesitated. But beneath that reflection, she thought she saw something else, another face layered over hers. Younger, softer, her brother. She blinked hard, it was gone. The first SEAL clipped into the rope, bracing against the current. The water surged to his chest, dragging him sideways with brutal force. Muscles strained as he fought across, inch by inch. The others watched, silent, calculating their odds. She felt her heart hammer, not for him but for what waited on the other side. Because he would be there, she knew it. Not fleeing, not hiding, waiting. Her turn came. She clipped in, testing the line with shaking hands. The younger SEAL stepped up behind her, close enough that his breath brushed her ear. "You can freeze out here too," he muttered, "but don't expect us to drag you back." The words were sharp, cruel, but underneath them she caught something different. Fear again. Desperation. He was lashing out because he couldn't admit how close death felt on this river, how little control any of them had. She didn't answer, she just stepped forward. The water hit like a wall, cold enough to steal breath, strong enough to shove her sideways. Her boots fought for grip, her body bent against the pull. Each step was war. Halfway across, she risked a glance up. The far bank, the tree line, shadows shifting. Her chest clenched, he was there, watching again. Not aiming, not firing, just watching. Her boots hit mud on the far side. She staggered up, gasping, hands trembling from more than cold. She scanned, rifle ready, but the shadows had swallowed him whole again. The rest of the team emerged one by one. They regrouped in silence, dripping, teeth clenched against the chill. The commander gave hand signals, pushing them forward. No pause, no rest. But she hesitated at the tree line. Something in her gut screamed. This wasn't pursuit anymore, it was ritual. Every step forward wasn't toward capture, it was toward revelation. And she wasn't sure she wanted it. Hours dragged again, the forest darker, thicker, crueler than before. The sun had vanished behind storm clouds, thunder rolling low in the distance. The SEALs pushed hard, but weariness was etched into their faces. Their movement slowed, shoulders sagged. One stumbled, catching himself with a curse. The younger SEAL muttered under his breath, words sharp with bitterness. "He's bleeding us dry, leading us into nothing." But she knew better, this wasn't nothing. It was everything. The storm broke just before dusk. Rain hammered through the canopy, soaking them in seconds. The air turned heavy, thick with the scent of earth and pine. Visibility shrank to a few feet, rifles useless in the haze of water and shadow. The commander called a temporary halt under a cluster of leaning pines. They huddled, shivering, mud pooling around their knees. The sound of rain was deafening, drowning out even their thoughts. And that's when one of them cracked. A seal older than the rest, lines carved deep in his face, whispered what they were all thinking. This isn't worth it. One man, hours chasing a ghost through hell. He's not leading us to an enemy camp, he's leading us to graves. The commander snapped back instantly. Our mission isn't up for debate. But the words rang hollow. Even he couldn't hide the truth. She stared at the mud, rain dripping from her helmet, and thought of her brother again. His laugh, his voice, the promise he'd made to come back. What if the scarred man knew where he'd gone? What if this entire pursuit wasn't a mission at all, but a message? Her chest burned. She wanted to tell them, to admit it, to say, this isn't random. He's connected to me, my brother, our past. But the words stayed buried. Because to say them out loud would break everything. When the rain finally eased, night had fallen. The forest glistened with water, every branch dripping, every leaf shining. Steam rose from the ground like ghosts. The team moved again, slower now, drained. She lagged at the rear, rifle heavy in her hands. The younger seal stayed near, though whether out of duty or distrust, she couldn't tell. They didn't speak, but every so often she felt his eyes on her, as if waiting for her to fracture. And maybe he wasn't wrong. Near midnight, they stumbled into a small clearing. The commander called another halt. They formed a loose circle, backs to each other, rifles outward. No fire, no light, just darkness pressing in. She sat with her knees pulled close, mud caked on her gear, hair plastered to her face. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind wouldn't stop. The scarred man was close. She could feel it like static in the air. Every shadow looked like him. Every sound belonged to him. And when sleep finally stole her for a moment, her dream was of him standing at the end of a hallway. Her brother's voice behind him, calling her name. She woke with a start, breath sharp, rifle jerking upward. Only trees, only rain, only silence. But the dream lingered. She wasn't sure when it happened, the moment she decided. Maybe it had been building all along. But by dawn, her path was set. She couldn't keep following orders blindly, not when every step pulled her deeper into a truth the others couldn't see. If she wanted answers, about the scarred man, about her brother, she would have to break from them. Alone. The river was gone behind them, the compound miles away. They were deep now, too deep for retreat. And yet, she felt the weight of a choice, pressing harder than the mud under her boots. Stay with them and remain silent, a soldier bound to orders, forever haunted. Or follow the pull, the scarred man, the truth, and risk becoming the traitor they already suspected she was. The commander gave orders to move again, his voice hard, brittle with fatigue. The seals obeyed, one by one slipping back into the trees. She stayed behind a second longer, watching them disappear, listening to their footsteps fade. Her rifle was heavy in her hands, her heart heavier still. Because the next step she took wouldn't just decide the mission. It would decide who she really was. And somewhere in the distance, carried faint on the morning air, came a sound. A whistle, low, deliberate. Not bird, not wind. Human. Her chest froze. It was him, calling her forward. What made her stop walking with them? It wasn't rebellion in a single step. It wasn't even clear at first. She fell behind naturally, her boots dragging more than theirs, her eyes lingering on the tree line longer than necessary. But somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, the gap grew. The commander's voice snapped on comms, "Close it up, sniper." She answered with a clipped copy, but her tone was hollow, delayed. Her body obeyed enough to keep suspicion low, but her mind was already gone, following a sound only she could hear. The whistle. It came again hours later, fainter this time, teasing, a fragment of music carried on the wind, not melody, just two tones. But to her it was unmistakable. Her brother used to whistle like that, in the yard, at the kitchen table, on nights when sleep wouldn't come packing the hall. It was no coincidence. Her chest ached so hard she had to hide a grimace behind a sip of water. The others noticed nothing, or pretended not to. By midday the commander called another halt. The men collapsed into wary silence, stripping rations, rewrapping wounds, checking gear. She wandered a few steps from the circle, crouching near a mossed rock, pretending to scan, pretending to keep watch. But she wasn't watching for enemies. She was waiting. And when she finally saw him, a flicker between branches, just far enough to vanish when she blinked, her body locked. It wasn't fear, it wasn't even shock. It was recognition sharpened to a blade. He wanted her alone, and he was daring her to come. The younger seal broke her trance. He squatted beside her, dropping a ration pack into her lap. His voice was low, almost kind, though rough with exhaustion. "You're slipping," he said. Her throat tightened, slipping. "Don't play dumb." His eyes stayed fixed on the tree line, not on her. "You're somewhere else, every damn time, and it's putting us at risk." She wanted to defend herself, to snap back, but what words could she use? That a ghost in the forest was calling her by her brother's voice. She forced her face neutral. "I'm fine." He gave a humorless laugh. "Fine, that word's worthless out here." He rose before she could answer, left her with the ration, left her with the guilt. And when she finally opened the pack, her hands were trembling too hard to eat. The march resumed. By evening the squad reached a ravine cut by centuries of water, rocks slick, drops sheer. They skirted the edge single file, one misstep from falling into nothing. Rain threatened again, the sky swollen with heavy clouds. That's when she heard it clearer than before. The whistle. This time closer, sharper. Her chest surged with heat, her pulse racing. She faltered mid-step. The seal behind her cursed, shoving her forward. "Move." She stumbled on, but her eyes darted. And she saw him. Not across a river, not hidden in trees, but standing brazenly on the far side of the ravine, still as stone. Scar catching the light, eyes locked on hers. The world narrowed to him alone. She almost called out, her lips parted. But then thunder cracked, echoing through the canyon, and he was gone. That night camp was tense. They formed their silent circle again, but no one rested. The commander muttered into comms, updating headquarters with clipped words. The younger seal cleaned his rifle for the third time, motions too fast, too sharp. The older one leaned against a tree, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. She sat alone again, mud heavy on her gear, her body shaking with the cold that came after rain. She told herself to breathe, to focus, to remember who she was. But the whistle wouldn't stop echoing. Her brother's whistle. And she couldn't stop the thought, what if he's alive? The scarred man's eyes had held something more than hostility. They had held knowledge. And that knowledge burned like a fuse inside her. She dreamed again. This time it wasn't a hallway, it was the river, her brother on one side, the scarred man on the other. She was in the water fighting the current, lungs burning, arms failing. And both of them just watched. Neither reached out. She woke choking on air, sweat cold beneath her gear. No one noticed, or maybe they did and didn't care. Either way, she was done pretending. At dawn, the commander gathered them with a sharp gesture. His voice was harder now, stripped of patience. "He's leading us to something. Whatever it is, we'll end it today." The squad nodded, grim, determined. She nodded too, but her heart pounded with a different rhythm. Today wasn't just the end of pursuit. It was the start of truth. The trail narrowed into rock, climbing steep and jagged. The squad spread wider, eyes cutting every angle. The air was still heavy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. And she knew before anyone else that he was near. Because she felt him. Every nerve in her body screamed his presence. When the first shot rang, it wasn't chaos. It was calculated. A round snapped into a tree inches from the commander's head, forcing them all to scatter for cover. "Contact front," voices shouted. Gunfire erupted, sharp, controlled, but she wasn't firing. Her eyes scanned, searching not for muzzle flashes but for him. And she saw him again. Not shooting, not moving, standing atop a boulder calm as stone. Looking only at her. The seals poured rounds into the tree line, bark exploded, branches shattered. The commander shouted orders over the noise. But her rifle stayed steady on him alone. Finger on trigger, heart in throat. He didn't flinch under the storm, didn't move. Just stared, as if waiting for her to choose. She whispered without meaning to, "Why?" The word disappeared in the chaos, but in her chest it thundered. Why him, why now, why her brother's whistle? Why did it feel less like combat and more like a summons? Her finger trembled, her eye blurred. But before she could fire, he vanished again. Slipped behind the boulder like smoke. And with him went the clarity she almost grasped. The firefight fizzled. No bodies, no blood, just silence and smoke. The commander cursed, fury boiling. "He's toying with us." The squad muttered agreement, anger sharpening their edges. But she stayed silent because she knew better. He wasn't toying. He was guiding. When they regrouped, mud on their faces, exhaustion in their bones, the younger seal snapped. He grabbed her arm, yanking her aside. His eyes were bloodshot, wild. "What the hell is this to you?" he hissed. She tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. "You see him differently. I've seen it. You hesitate, you don't shoot, you know him." His voice cracked on the last word. Her throat burned, the truth clawed to get out. But before she could speak, the commander's voice cut across. "Move out now." The boy released her with a shove. His glare lingered, raw with betrayal. She staggered, heart pounding. Because he was right. And soon she would have to choose between silence and confession. That night, when the squad collapsed again in mud and shadows, she didn't sleep. She lay with eyes wide, rifle across her chest, listening. And when the whistle came, soft, low, deliberate, she didn't hesitate. She rose slowly, quietly. Step by step, she moved into the trees, away from the circle, away from their suspicion, their doubt. Her boots sank into wet leaves, her breaths were shallow, her heart thundered like gunfire. She didn't look back, because she knew if she did, she would break. The forest swallowed her whole. And ahead in the darkness, a figure waited. Scar-catching moonlight. Still silent, watching. The scarred man. Not her enemy. Not yet. But her reckoning. The forest was too quiet. Every step she took seemed to echo, though her boots barely touched the earth. Moonlight sifted through branches in broken shards, painting her in silver and shadow. And there he was. Closer than ever. The scar on his face gleamed in the pale light, cutting across his cheek like a map of violence. His posture was rigid, unmoving. His eyes, those eyes, held hers without flinching. Her rifle trembled in her hands. She raised it out of instinct, the barrel locking on his chest. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even reach for a weapon. The silence stretched. It wasn't the silence of enemies preparing to strike. It was the silence of recognition. And that silence terrified her more than bullets ever had. Her voice cracked when it came. "Who are you?" No answer, just that stare unwavering. Her throat tightened. She forced her voice louder, sharper. Say something. Finally he spoke. Low, gravel scraping stone. Words dragged across years of pain. You already know. Her stomach twisted. The sound of him, raw, deliberate, clawed at something buried deep in her. She shook her head hard, as though denial could sever the thread. No, I don't. You do, his gaze never wavered. You've known since the river. Her breath caught. The whistle. Her brother's whistle. The one thing that had tethered her through childhood, through grief, through war. Her rifle sagged an inch. Her arms felt heavy as lead. Why, she whispered. He stepped closer, just one step, slow, careful. She froze. Her body screamed to back away, but her feet rooted. You weren't supposed to be here, he said. Not like this, not with them. Her pulse hammered. With who? The ones who don't see you, who never will. The ones who treat you as a weapon, not as blood, not as family. Her chest heaved. His words cut too deep, too precise. How do you know that? She demanded, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. His scar caught the moonlight again as he tilted his head. Because he told me. Her stomach dropped. The air rushed out of her lungs like a punch. The word barely scraped her lips. The man nodded once. Your brother. The ground tilted beneath her. She staggered back, almost slipping in the wet leaves. No, she rasped, that's not possible. Isn't it? His tone was steady, unshaken. Her vision blurred. Memories tore through her. A folded flag, a coffin draped in stars, a mother's broken sobs, the emptiness of years defined by absence. She had mourned. She had buried him in her heart, in the silence between missions. And yet, the whistle, the dreams, the pull. Everything suddenly felt less like madness, more like truth clawing free. Her knees threatened to buckle. She forced herself upright, clutching her rifle like it could anchor her. Prove it, she said. Her voice was raw, broken. The scarred man's expression didn't shift. I don't need to prove what you already feel. Her teeth clenched. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to demand facts, but the ache in her chest betrayed her rage. Because part of her, against all reason, believed him. Branches cracked behind her. Her instinct snapped sharp. She whirled, rifle raised, finger on trigger. But it wasn't him. It was them. The squad. The commander, the SEALs. Mud-caked rifles raised, eyes burning with betrayal. The younger SEAL's voice cut the air like a blade. I knew it. She froze, her chest heaved. The commander's voice followed, hard and cold. Step away from him. Her rifle trembled between two worlds. Behind her, the scarred man stood silent, unflinching. Ahead, the squad glared, their barrels fixed on her as much as on him. The younger SEAL spat. You've been leading us into his hands this whole time. You've been with him. Her voice cracked. No. Then what is this? He gestured wildly, eyes wide, veins bulging at his neck. You walk off in the night, meet him alone, and don't pull the trigger. The commander's glare could have burned through steel. Last chance, sniper, step back, or I put you down myself. Her body split in two. One half screamed loyalty, training, duty. The squad who had carried her through mud, through storms, through fire. The other half screamed blood, memory, the impossible hope that her brother wasn't lost after all. She couldn't breathe. Her finger hovered on the trigger, but she couldn't decide where to aim. At them, at him, at herself. Her vision swam. The scarred man finally spoke. Truth doesn't wait for permission. The words sliced through the noise, steady, calm, certain. And for the first time, she realized something. He wasn't asking her to join him. He was asking her to remember. Her brother's face flashed in her mind. Not in uniform, not in a coffin, alive, laughing, whistling. Her hands shook so violently, the rifle clattered to the ground. The sound shattered the moment. The squad tensed, fingers tightening on triggers. The commander barked, "On your knees, now." But she didn't move. She couldn't, because her world had already collapsed. The scarred man's voice dropped lower, "Choose." Her head whipped between them. The squad, breathing hard, furious, betrayed. Him, scar-catching moonlight, eyes holding hers with unbreakable weight. Her chest split with the weight of it. And before she could speak, before she could even think, the forest erupted. Gunfire, explosion, shouts. A third force had arrived. Shadows poured from the trees, armed, masked, moving with brutal precision. Bullets carved the night, branches snapped, mud sprayed. The scarred man vanished into the chaos like smoke. The squad dove for cover, returning fire, shouting over comms. And she stood frozen in the middle of it all. Not firing, not moving. Caught between every side, every truth, every lie. The whistle still ringing in her ears. By the time the fight ended, the masked force melted away as quickly as they had come. Bodies lay twisted in mud, smoke stung the air, blood soaked the leaves. The commander staggered to his feet, shouting orders, rallying survivors. The younger SEAL collapsed to his knees, blood streaming down his arm. The older one dragged him back, muttering prayers louder now. And her. She was gone. Not dead, not captured. Gone. Because when the smoke cleared, her rifle lay abandoned in the dirt. And her tracks led into the trees. Toward him. Toward the truth. Toward her brother. The rain started before dawn. Thin at first, barely more than mist clinging to the leaves. Then heavier, cold sheets hammering the forest floor, swallowing footprints in seconds. She moved through it like a shadow, rifle gone, helmet gone, just her pack, her pistol, and the weight in her chest. The squad would brand her a traitor now. Maybe they already had. Maybe even command had written her name off as lost or worse. But none of that mattered anymore. Not compared to him. Not compared to what she needed to know. Hours blurred. The rain turned rivers into snakes of brown water that cut across the jungle, swallowing trees, dragging branches into their pull. She followed them anyway. And then, the whistle. Soft, thin, but clear. Her legs locked. It wasn't memory, not a hallucination, not the desperate tricks of exhaustion. It was real. Her breath tore ragged in her throat as she pushed through the trees, mud clinging to her boots, branches whipping her arms. The whistle grew louder. And there through the rain he stood. The scarred man. Waiting. This time he didn't vanish, didn't melt into shadows. He just stood, arms loose at his sides, eyes steady. She stumbled to a stop a few paces away. Mud splashed up her legs, rain plastering her hair to her face. Her voice cracked, "Why me?" His head tilted, "Because you're the only one who would listen." She shook her head violently, drops flinging off her lashes. "No, no, I buried him. I saw the coffin. You saw what they showed you." Her chest heaved. "That's not possible." The scar glistened under the rain as he stepped closer. "Truth doesn't care if it's possible." Her lip trembled. The ground beneath her felt like it was tilting again, the way it had when she first heard his voice in the forest. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. His gaze locked into hers, unwavering. Not what I want, what he wanted. The air seemed to still, even under the storm. Her brother's name trembled on her lips. She couldn't say it, couldn't breathe it. Instead, the scarred man reached into his jacket. Her hand shot to her pistol, instinct. But he didn't draw a weapon. He drew something small, folded, weathered. Paper. He held it out. Her heart slammed against her ribs as her eyes locked on it. She knew that paper, that crease, That fold. A letter. The letter. The one she had written the night before he deployed. The one she had slipped into his pack when he wasn't looking. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the mud, chest convulsing, throat burning with something she hadn't allowed herself in years, tears. She snatched the letter from his hand, clutching it to her chest like it might vanish. How she rasped. His voice was steady but softer now, almost gentle, because he gave it to me. The words slammed through her like bullets. Her vision blurred through the rain and her own tears. Her brother hadn't burned in that convoy. He hadn't vanished into the dirt of some unmarked battlefield. He had lived. And at some point before the world took him again, he had trusted this man, the scarred stranger, to carry her words. Her hands shook violently as she unfolded the damp paper. The ink was faded, smudged, but still hers. Her voice trembled as she read, barely audible under the storm. Don't forget who you are. Don't let them take that from you. Come back, please. The words blurred through her tears. And suddenly, the years of silence, of grief, of emptiness shifted. Because he had heard her. Because he had carried her voice with him. Because even in the end, he hadn't been alone. She lowered the paper slowly, eyes lifting to the scarred man. Where is he? Her voice was raw, pleading, tell me where. His jaw tightened. Rain slid down the line of his scar. He's gone. The words shattered her. Her knees hit the mud. The paper clutched in her fist crumpled, soaking through. The storm drowned the sound she made, but it ripped her open. Gone again. But this time different. Not vanished, not a lie wrapped in flags and folded hands. This time he had lived, he had fought, he had carried her words. This time she knew the truth. Her grief split in two, pain and peace intertwined, jagged, inseparable. The scarred man crouched beside her. His voice was almost lost under the rain. He wanted you to know you weren't forgotten. That's why I found you. That's why you're here. She turned her face toward him, eyes red, lashes heavy with water. Why you? He looked away briefly. His scar caught the lightning flash. Because I was the one who couldn't save him. The confession landed heavy. For the first time, his voice cracked. And in that crack, she heard the truth of him. Not just a messenger, not just a ghost from the river, but a man carrying his own weight, his own failure, his own endless penance. They stayed like that for what felt like hours. The storm washed around them, relentless, but it couldn't touch the stillness between them. Finally, she forced herself up, legs shaking, paper still clenched in her hand. Her voice steadied, though it was thin as glass. What now? The scarred man rose with her, his face unreadable. Now you carry him forward. Her throat ached, and you. He met her gaze one last time. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And before she could answer, before she could even ask his name, he stepped back into the storm and vanished. She stood alone. The rain slowed, softening into mist again. The forest felt emptied, hushed, as though holding its breath with her. She looked down at the crumpled paper in her hand. Her letter. Her brother's silence. Her truth. For the first time in years, she didn't feel hollow. Still broken, still scarred. But not hollow. Because grief wasn't absence. It was love that refused to leave. And as she turned toward the long path back, the squad, the command, the world that might never forgive her, she carried that truth like a weapon. Not to fight with, but to endure with. When the video fades to black, only the rain remains. And the faint echo of a whistle, carried not as sound but as memory.